Prince Harry is expected to win his bid to regain armed security while visiting the UK, according to reports. Sources told People magazine that there are positive signs from the government to reverse the decision to not grant Harry security.
Speculation is reaching a fever pitch as new developments surrounding Prince Harry's past and present collide in a way no one expected, with news of Chelsy's third baby resurfacing old emotions.
Harry's relationship with Chelsy Davy, the true love of his life, front and
Whispers are growing about what it might reveal about the choices that shaped his life. At the same time, questions about Meghan's influence are intensifying, fueling dramatic claims and bold predictions about what could come next. So, do you think this is simply a rumor spiraling out of control, or is something deeper unfolding behind the scenes? Let's know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's find out. The love that wasn't meant to be, and the life that followed. Before the fame, the controversies, and the constant headlines, there was a much simpler story, one that quietly shaped everything that came after it. Back in 2004, Prince Harry crossed paths with Chelsy Davy, and what followed was far from the polished, fairy tale romance often imagined in royal circles. Instead, it was a real, imperfect love story, filled with emotion, uncertainty, and moments that felt deeply human. Their relationship unfolded over several years, with breakups and reunions shaping its course. Through it all, a strong emotional bond kept drawing them back together. They shared laughter, traveled to different places, and enjoyed simple, normal moments, despite living in the spotlight of a royal world that never truly rested. For Chelsy, loving Harry meant more than just loving a man. It meant quietly stepping into a life filled with expectations, pressure, and unseen demands. It was a world that could feel overwhelming, yet she made a sincere effort to understand it and belong. She tried with all her heart. She moved closer to him, adjusted her routine, and gradually found herself drawn deeper into the royal orbit. She met members of his family, stood beside him at important public events, and began to experience firsthand what it meant to be connected to one of the most watched families in the world. But beneath the surface of these appearances, something more complicated was unfolding. The royal environment is not simply about tradition or status. It operates like a system with its own rules. Every movement is watched, every expression is analyzed, every decision can become a headline. For someone not raised within that structure, it can feel overwhelming, even suffocating. For Chelsy, it was exactly that. She later described the experience as full-on crazy and uncomfortable, a phrase that may sound simple but carries a great deal of meaning. It wasn't just about pressure, it was about a loss of personal space, a life where privacy becomes almost impossible, and where individuality is often overshadowed by expectation. That insight reveals something crucial. Her decision was never truly about walking away from Harry himself. It was about stepping away from the life that came with him. And that difference is important, because it shows that love, no matter how genuine, is sometimes not enough to sustain a relationship when the environment surrounding it becomes too heavy to carry. As time passed, the cracks began to show more clearly. Distance played its part. So did misunderstandings, personal growth, and the natural challenges that come with young relationships under intense public scrutiny. Eventually, they reached a point where continuing together felt harder than letting go. So they ended it. But what followed is what gives this story a deeper, almost poetic meaning. Chelsy did not try to remain in the spotlight. She didn't give interviews to explain her side or seek public sympathy. Instead, she chose a different path, one that was quieter, more grounded, and entirely her own. She focused on her growth. She pursued a legal career, becoming a qualified lawyer at Allen & Overy, a respected global firm known for its high standards. Later, she shifted direction, moving into business and launching a jewelry brand that reflected her roots with a focus on ethically sourced African materials. Her life began to take on a different rhythm. Less noise, more intention. She married Sam Cutmore Scott, started a family, and gradually built a world that existed far away from the constant glare of public attention. There were no dramatic public statements, no attempts to reshape the narrative, no desire to stay relevant in the media cycle. Just a life lived quietly, deliberately, and on her own terms. And that is where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Because while Chelsy stepped away from the noise and built something steady and private, Harry's path led him deeper into a world where silence is rare and visibility is constant. Two people, once closely connected, choosing entirely different directions, not because one was right and the other wrong, but because each followed what they could truly live with. And in that contrast lies the real story, not just of love, but of choice, identity, and the quiet courage it takes to walk away from a life that doesn't fit, even when the feelings are still there. Why did Harry's relationship with Chelsy crash? How did it happen? Let's delve into the details of how Scrutiny ended Harry and Chelsy's relationship. The price of being royal. The relationship between Prince Harry and Chelsy Davy was not just a love story. It was a quiet battle against a world that never looked away. What they shared was real, but it existed under a spotlight so harsh that it began to reshape their reality, especially for someone who never chose that life to begin with. Chelsy later opened up about what it truly felt like to be pulled into that relentless attention. She described it as overwhelming in every sense, too much, too fast, and too invasive. It wasn't just about cameras flashing at events. It was the constant presence, the feeling of being watched even in the most ordinary moments. There were times she was followed, times her privacy was completely ignored, and even an incident where a tracking device was reportedly placed on her car. For a young woman simply trying to grow, learn, and live like any other person her age, it became unbearable. She admitted that during the worst moments, she struggled deeply. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was frightening and disorienting. She was still young, still figuring out who she was, yet the world seemed to demand that she already knew how to survive intense public judgment. She wanted normalcy, the kind that allows you to make mistakes quietly, to laugh without headlines, and to exist without explanation. Instead, everything felt amplified and exposed. It reached a point where escape felt like the only option, which is why returning to Africa, where life felt calmer and more grounded, became so important to her. There, she could breathe again. There, she could simply be. Prince Harry, reflecting on their relationship in his memoir Spare, offered a perspective filled with understanding rather than resentment. He recognized that the life he was born into came with a weight that not everyone is meant to carry. The constant scrutiny, the lack of personal space, the idea that every move is observed and interpreted. It's not a natural way to live. And for Chelsy, it became clear that this was not the future she wanted. He acknowledged that he could never ask her to accept a life where she would always feel pursued, always feel like she was being watched. It wasn't just about love, it was about the cost of that love. Could he really expect someone he cared about to sacrifice her sense of freedom and peace for a role she never chose? For Harry, the answer was no. Chelsy herself was honest about her uncertainty. She questioned whether she could handle a lifetime of that pressure, of always having someone metaphorically on your heels. It wasn't a temporary situation, it was permanent, woven into the very fabric of royal life. And in that moment of clarity, she chose honesty over endurance. Harry didn't fight her decision. Instead, he respected it. He understood her longing for a life that felt like her own, not one dictated by public expectation. In many ways, he even related to her feelings. He admitted that if he had been given the choice, he might have chosen a quieter life too, one free from the constant gaze of the world. Their separation, then, was not born out of a lack of love, but from a deep awareness of reality. He missed her, and he didn't hide that. But he also recognized that love on its own is not always enough when the environment around it becomes too heavy to bear. In a touching reflection, Harry framed their parting not as a loss, but as a kind of release. He saw it as a moment where both of them were given the chance to reclaim something essential, their freedom. In his words, when he eventually found his own wings, he believed Chelsy had already found hers. And perhaps that is what makes their story so compelling. It is not just about romance, but about choice, identity, and the courage to walk away from something meaningful in order to protect something even deeper, the right to live freely. Why would Harry allow such a lady to slip out of his reach? Could he have been under the influence of his loss, isolation, and decision-making? The unraveling. There is a popular idea that people's lives break down because of one dramatic moment, one shocking event that changes everything overnight. But in reality, that is rarely how things unfold. More often, a person's life shifts slowly, almost quietly, through a series of small decisions and subtle changes. Each choice may seem harmless on its own, but over time, they begin to reshape direction, relationships, and even identity. In the case of Prince Harry, many observers believe this gradual process started long before the public began to notice its effects. It wasn't one single turning point, but rather a chain of moments, some emotional, some relational, that built upon each other over the years. A key part of that story lies in his early life. Losing his mother, Princess Diana, at such a young age was not just a tragic event, it was a defining one. Grief at that stage of life does not simply fade away, it often settles deep within, shaping how a person sees the world, relationships, and even themselves. Harry has spoken openly about this pain, about how it followed him into adulthood, and how growing up under constant public scrutiny only made it harder to process. That emotional foundation matters more than people often realize. When someone is raised in a world of immense privilege, yet carries unresolved pain, those two forces tend to coexist in complex ways. Privilege can provide access and opportunity, but pain influences perception, reactions, and choices. Over time, the interplay between both can shape decisions in ways that are not always obvious from the outside. As the years passed, changes in Harry's relationships became more noticeable. Long-standing friendships began to shift. Some friends reportedly grew distant, while others were no longer part of his life at all. It wasn't always loud or confrontational. It was often quiet, gradual, almost unspoken. People who questioned certain choices or directions seemed to fade into the background. The same pattern appeared within his family. His relationship with Prince William, once seen as close and unshakable, became increasingly strained. Reports of tension and disagreement began to surface, suggesting a growing emotional distance between the brothers. Even his connection with his father faced its own challenges, adding another layer to an already complex situation. Over time, Harry's circle appeared to shrink. Where there was once a wide network of friends, advisors, and family connections, there now seemed to be a more limited, tightly controlled environment. His world became centered around his immediate family, his wife and children, and a smaller group of trusted individuals. At first glance, a smaller circle can feel safer, even healthier. It can bring clarity, reduce noise, and create a sense of control. But there is another side to it. When a person's world becomes too narrow, it can also lead to a kind of quiet isolation. Fewer perspectives mean fewer challenges, fewer disagreements, but also fewer opportunities for balance and reflection. And that is where things become more complex. Because what starts as protection can slowly begin to feel like restriction. The absence of differing voices may create comfort in the short term, but over time, it can limit growth and deepen a sense of separation from others. Harry himself has acknowledged losing friendships along the way. He has spoken about the difficulty of maintaining certain relationships and the emotional weight that comes with those losses. Whether these changes are seen as necessary, inevitable, or even self-imposed depends largely on perspective. Some may view them as part of personal growth, while others see a pattern of increasing distance. But regardless of interpretation, the outcome appears consistent. A man who was once surrounded by a wide and influential circle now seems to many observers to be navigating a much quieter, more contained world. And it is within that quietness that the emotional depth of this story truly begins to emerge. Because isolation is not always loud or visible. Sometimes it is felt most deeply in the absence of what once was, in the silence left behind by relationships that slowly, almost unnoticed, slipped away. Could the news of Chelsy's baby have triggered something in Harry? Why would Harry compare his life with Meghan to that of Chelsy? Let's dig into the details of Meghan and Harry's story that has been fueling global debate. Royal exit. Real consequences. A fresh wave of discussion has once again placed the marriage of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle under intense public attention, with many questioning how deeply their union has transformed Harry's life, both positively and negatively. What was once seen as a modern love story has, over time, evolved into a subject of ongoing debate, drawing opinions from royal observers, commentators, and the general public alike. Recent reports suggest that concerns are growing over how much Harry's life has shifted since his marriage. Before stepping away from royal duties, he was widely regarded as one of the most relatable and admired members of the British royal family. His role was clearly defined, his public image well established, and his place within the monarchy seemed secure. However, his decision to step back from royal responsibilities and begin a new life abroad is now being viewed by some as a major turning point, one that may carry long-term consequences. According to various commentaries highlighted in media discussions, this transition is seen by critics as more than just a personal decision. They argue that it represents a significant departure from royal tradition, one that has reshaped not only Harry's public role, but also his sense of identity. Moving away from the structure and expectations of royal life has, in their view, created a level of uncertainty around who he is and where he fits in the broader picture. Public reactions form a large part of this narrative. Some observers believe that by stepping away, Harry has not only distanced himself from his official duties, but also from his family and the support system that had been part of his life since birth. To these critics, the change appears profound, almost as if he has stepped out of a world that once gave him clarity and purpose, into one that is still taking shape. There are also more speculative voices that suggest Harry may at times feel restricted by his current situation. These opinions paint a picture of a man adjusting to a life that is very different from the one he left behind. Less structured, more uncertain, and perhaps more demanding in unexpected ways. The contrast between his past and present circumstances is often highlighted, with some suggesting that the privileges and stability of royal life have been replaced by new pressures and challenges. In contrast, Meghan is often portrayed as someone who has adapted more easily to this new chapter. Reports frequently describe her as confident and comfortable in navigating life outside the royal system. This perceived difference in adjustment between the couple adds another layer to the ongoing conversation, with some suggesting that their individual experiences of this transition may not be entirely the same. It is important to note, however, that much of this discussion is driven by opinion rather than confirmed fact. The narrative continues to grow largely through interpretation, speculation, and public perception. Yet despite this, it has gained significant traction, shaping how many people view the couple and their choices. At the heart of it all lies a compelling and complex story, that of a prince who once lived within a clearly defined world, now forging a path that is far less predictable. his journey raises broader questions about identity, freedom, responsibility, and the personal cost of stepping away from tradition. Whether seen as an act of courage or a decision filled with regret, Harry's transformation continues to capture attention, leaving many to wonder what has truly been gained and what may have been lost in the process of redefining his life. These seem to have angered Harry beyond limits. How did Harry eventually handle the devastating situation? Will the court be able to come to his aid? Let's find out. The courtroom battles. While shifts were taking place in Harry's personal relationships, another powerful force in his life was steadily growing: his legal battles. What once seemed like a side issue has now become a defining part of who he is after leaving royal duties. In many ways, these court cases have shaped not just his public image, but also how he sees himself and his place in the world. At the heart of his legal fight is a strong campaign against the press. Harry has repeatedly expressed the belief that intrusive and unethical media practices played a major role in damaging his relationships, affecting his mental well-being, and disrupting his personal life. To him, these legal actions are not just about seeking compensation or correcting past wrongs. They are about protecting privacy, setting boundaries, and holding powerful institutions accountable. And in some instances, his efforts have led to important legal victories. These wins may seem like progress, but legal battles are rarely simple stories of winning and losing. They are also about something far deeper: credibility. In a courtroom, credibility is everything. It determines how seriously a person's words are taken, how much weight their testimony carries, and ultimately, how a case unfolds. Once a person's credibility is questioned, restoring it becomes a difficult and delicate process. It is not just about proving a point, it is about being believed. During legal proceedings involving media organizations such as the Daily Mail and others, Harry made firm statements under oath. One of his key claims was that he did not maintain personal relationships with journalists, and that any information published about him must have been obtained through unlawful or improper means. However, as the case unfolded, new pieces of evidence were introduced that appeared to challenge this narrative. Private messages were presented in court, messages that suggested a level of familiarity and warmth that seemed inconsistent with his earlier statements. Terms like sugar and movie snuggles painted a picture of a more personal connection than what had been described. This is where a contradiction emerged. And in legal contexts, contradictions are not taken lightly. They do not automatically prove wrongdoing, but they do raise questions. Questions about accuracy, questions about memory, and, most importantly, questions about consistency. The issue is not necessarily the content of the messages themselves. People communicate in many different ways, and context always matters. The real concern lies in whether a person's statements remain consistent with the available evidence. When they do not align, it creates doubt, and doubt, in legal and public spaces, carries significant weight. Because once trust is affected, the consequences extend far beyond a single case. It can influence how the public perceives a person, how future claims are received, and how their character is judged. Trust is a fragile foundation. When it cracks, rebuilding it requires time, transparency, and careful effort. At the same time, these legal efforts demand an enormous amount of energy. Court cases are not just intellectual exercises, they are emotionally and mentally draining. They require constant attention, long hours, repeated explanations, and often the painful revisiting of deeply personal and sometimes painful experiences. Over time, engaging in such battles can shape a person's internal world. It can reinforce a sense of opposition, of always needing to defend, respond, and prove. Even outside the courtroom, the mindset of conflict can linger. Instead of peace, there is preparation. Instead of resolution, there is anticipation of the next challenge. This brings us to a deeper and more personal question. When a person spends years engaged in battles, whether in court, in relationships, or within themselves, what does that do to their inner life? Because not all battles are visible. Not all conflicts are fought with evidence and arguments in a courtroom. Some battles are quiet. They happen in the mind, in moments of reflection, in the way a person interprets their experiences and responds to the world around them. And sometimes, those unseen battles are the ones that shape a person the most. Are there other factors that might have contributed to the little disappointments? What could have done better? Let's journey into the details of money, identity, and the road ahead. The bigger picture. Beyond relationships and courtrooms, there is another important layer to this story. Money, identity, and the ability to sustain a life over time. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped away from royal duties, they entered a world filled with new possibilities. They were no longer bound by the strict structure of royal life. Instead, they had the freedom to build something of their own, and with that freedom came major opportunities. They signed large deals with well-known platforms like Netflix and Spotify. They explored publishing, media production, and other ventures that many people only dream of. At the beginning, it looked like a powerful financial base, something that could support their lifestyle for years to come. But as time passed, things began to shift. Not every project produced the expected results. Some partnerships were adjusted, others reportedly came to an early end. What once looked like long-term collaborations began to show signs of change. At the same time, their expenses did not reduce. In fact, they remained quite high. There are costs linked to personal security, staff salaries, housing, travel, and legal matters. Maintaining a lifestyle that matches their public status requires steady and reliable income. And that is where pressure begins to build. Because it is not only about money, it is also about the mind. When your financial situation, public image, and reputation are constantly being examined, it affects how you think, how you act, and even how you feel. Every decision carries weight. Every step can be judged. That kind of environment can quietly create stress, even if it is not always visible on the surface. There is also something else to consider. Time. A particular date has been widely discussed, May 19th, 2028. This marks the 10th anniversary of their marriage. In places like California, long-term marriages can carry certain legal and financial implications. While no one can predict the future, this date has become symbolic. It represents time passing, stability tested, and the possibility of change. But beyond finances and legal discussions, the deeper question remains about identity. Who is Prince Harry now becoming? Is he a man determined to build a new life on his own terms? Someone seeking independence, healing, and direction? Or is he still reacting to the experiences and pressures of the life he left behind? And perhaps even more importantly, where is this journey leading him? Toward clarity, peace, and purpose? Or deeper into tension, conflict, and uncertainty? Meanwhile, Chelsy Davy presents a different kind of story. She is not constantly in the spotlight. She does not live her life through headlines or public debates. Instead, she appears to have chosen a quieter path, one focused on family, personal growth, and meaningful living. Her life seems guided by intention rather than attention, built on stability, not spectacle. And this contrast is powerful, because it shows that two people can come from similar beginnings, share connections, and yet walk completely different paths based on their choices. Sometimes, the difference between two individuals is not what they experienced together, but what they decided to do with what they were given, or even what they lost. And that is where the story becomes deeper. Between love and loss, between silence and noise, between decisions made and consequences faced, life continues to unfold in ways that are not always predictable. not as a finished story, but as something still in motion. And perhaps the most important question that remains is this: when everything else fades, when the noise settles, the opinions quiet down, and the world moves on, what truly remains? So, what do you think about Meghan Markle's role in the success of her marriage? Was Harry right to have let go of Chelsy? We'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe.